Hi, friends. Welcome to Mondays with Michelle, a sanctuary where we unite to inspire hope and peace through engaging discussions about mental health, relationships, and parenting. I'm Michelle, your guide through the sanctuary. I am a mental health therapist with over 14 years of experience, an aspiring author currently navigating the book proposal process, a peacemaker, and an advocate for those without a voice. Today, on this week's episode, we're going to be talking about creativity, including its role in healing trauma and improving mental health. Thank you so much for being here. So, as we've been doing every week, I started by pulling a card for us. This is actually from a new deck called Creativity, which is awesome considering that's our topic. So, this is actually my favorite deck I have so far. I'm going to see if I can show this to you. So the sides, yeah, it shows up pretty well. The sides of the cards are golden, so it is just beautiful, and the pictures on them are gorgeous. So I definitely recommend it. So before the episode, I pulled a card for us of what we need related to creativity. And I was kind of surprised by the card I pulled. I pulled Stuck. This is, oh, that's hard to see. There we go. So again, very beautiful. And then what it says, you may be stuck because you are overly attached to a method or piece. And this has a book that came with it. So I'm going to go ahead and read the description. The book is by Amy Zerner and Monte Farber. Looks like they have several other books that they've also written. So maybe you want to check out some of their work. So the stuck card says, the stuck card can mean problems you are having with your process are the results of you being overly attached to one or more of its components. It is a reminder that creativity takes you on a journey of exploration. And you should let it lead you where it wants to take you and in its own time. Being stubborn or closing your mind and heart to alternative approaches or results can cause you to build walls of resistance in the middle of your road to progress. The best way to deal with being stuck is to stop grasping the process so tightly and relinquish control, even if only for a few moments, so that new ideas can arise and be considered. Don't be afraid to ask for help. So after reading that, I thought that it fit really well with actually what we're going to talk about today and how creativity affects and can help us heal from things like trauma. And it's also used in mental health treatment. So when I read the part about being stuck can be related to building up walls or getting overly focused or holding on to control in the process, definitely made sense. It's been kind of a theme in my life the last year and a half, to just let go and let whatever happens, knowing we're going to be okay no matter what. Life keeps going on, even when we have to overcome some hard times. Sometimes the hard times are there to kind of get us unstuck and move us to the place where we're meant to be instead of remaining stagnant. So sometimes the hard times in our life are actually a blessing that encourage us to get out of our comfort zone, maybe open ourselves up to some creativity, or maybe at least some out of the box sort of solutions. So on that note, It was a great card. And we can move into the content. So we'll start off by talking about creativity. You can read a little bit more in my Substack article that I posted this week on creativity. In what I'll share now is my personal experience observing kids who experience trauma in their lives, and sitting with that process. So when in my not so recent past, or my not so long ago past, my more recent past, I wore my play therapy hat, where as a mental health therapist, I specialized with children either who were in the foster care system or experienced trauma, even if they weren't in foster care. And so I was able to sit with a lot of those very big feelings. One of the things I noticed, and that I would frequently reflect on, I think I even talked to some of my friends about it on a few occasions, is just being amazed at how kids have this natural healing ability. They would be having lots of symptoms related to trauma, going through hardships, but they would just come into the therapy space and just knowing what they needed to do that week. And then over time, they would heal. They were able to shift through what they needed to, specifically through their play. And that often left me wondering, they could do it so naturally. Granted, I was there, I could guide some of the process, but a lot of the things they knew innately what they needed to do. So I was pretty amazed by that. And it left me wondering, what happens during adulthood that we lose this natural ability to heal ourselves? For example, some people struggle with their traumatic experiences, even that happened, early on in childhood, throughout their entire life. It becomes very deeply ingrained in them. So I often pondered that. What happens? How do we lose this natural healing ability? It's from what I saw, it was very similar to our body naturally heals itself. Obviously, if we get sick, we have an immune system that helps fight it off. We get better. Similarly, if we get a scrape or a cut, we definitely naturally heal. A scab's over and it heals. So internally, when we're struggling with situations that happen in our life, there is somewhat of a natural healing process there. Our mental health has that same sort of ability. And that said, it can be harder to tap into that with adults versus kids just automatically get it. And it was just last week that those thoughts came to me again. And as I've been exploring my own creativity more and really sitting with experiences and writing about things to be able to share with all of you, it hit me that a piece of that could very well be creativity. During childhood, creativity is encouraged. We encourage kids to sing, to play instruments, to go to dance lessons, to participate in other arts, we buy kids crayons and colored pencils and markers. Schools require those things on the school supply list. They write, they draw. There's just so many things that we encourage kids to do as far as creativity goes. So they're much more able to express themselves, whatever they need to express. Whereas when we start getting older, that tends to start being stifled. We store away our crayons and coloring books, our markers, our colored pencils, even our musical instruments. We end up putting all of those things in storage totes and letting them hang out in our closet. So, because typically during adulthood, people pass along messages like, well, what are you really going to do to earn an income? Like, if kids want to major in theater or music, sometimes that's discouraged. People's common response is, well, how are you going to make money doing that? So, and that discourages kids from pursuing those creative endeavors in adulthood. Um, and we tend not to prioritize our creativity in adulthood, which, as I'm talking about today, I'm making a perhaps bold statement, but that can actually do us harm to put those things away. And we can tap into our natural healing potential when we get those things back out and start doing them again, to really start making them a part of our daily life. So that moves us to healing from trauma. So I've already talked a little bit, just kind of quick if you don't know what trauma is. Most people do nowadays, but the trauma I'm talking about is what they refer to as big T trauma, which is basically interpersonal trauma. It's somebody else doing something to you that causes harm. So abuse, neglect, any types of those things. There's also what they call little t trauma, like car accidents, things that tend to happen once, a bad storm goes through, which is still traumatic. We just refer to it as little t trauma because it doesn't have exactly the same effect on our mental health and well-being as much as big T trauma does. It just looks a little bit different. So one of the experts in the field of trauma is Bessel Kolk. He's a medical doctor, and he wrote this very popular selling book called The Body Keeps the Score. You can tell my copy is pretty well used. It's been hanging out on my shelf for a while now. But I wanted to read something that really talks about and exemplifies some things I talked about with trauma. So I will begin by reading. It's about something called depersonalization, which is when the body splits off and kind of disconnects from itself. The mind kind of disconnects from the body. She responded to her trauma script by going numb. Her mind went blank, and nearly every area of her body showed markedly decreased activity. Her heart rate and blood pressure didn't elevate. When asked how she'd felt during the scan, she replied, "I felt just like I felt at the time of the accident. I felt nothing." Anyone who deals with traumatized men, women, or children is sooner or later confronted with blank stares and absent minds, the outward manifestation of the biological freeze reaction. Depersonalization is one symptom of the massive dissociation created by trauma. With nearly every part of their brains tuned out, they obviously cannot think, feel deeply, remember, or make sense out of what is going on. Conventional talk therapy in those circumstances is virtually useless. So I thought that was a powerful statement. That's why I wanted to share it with you, that our kind of go-to methods when you're working with trauma basically goes out the window. That can be somewhat frustrating when working with insurance companies because they like things to be very straightforward, very scientific, well-researched, very in-the-box cognitive behavioral therapy. And through my trauma training, usually our gold standard of treatment, pure cognitive behavioral therapy, is actually counterindicated for experiences of trauma, meaning that we should not do that. So that leaves us, when we're specializing with trauma, to find more out of the box sort of techniques that really promotes the healing process. So we find ourselves incorporating creative techniques in order to process through those experiences in a way people can handle and they can respond to, rather than getting into this state of dissociation or, their defense mechanisms kicking in. We have to find ways to kind of get around defense mechanisms. Um, so part of that is hugely involved in creativity in for children, and even I would argue during this podcast that even for adults we need to do these things. Um, so what the creative techniques do, other than what I just shared with you, is it's a way to release the stuck energy that's stored in the body. I don't have other excerpts picked out, but in this book, The Body Keeps the Score, it describes it very well how the energy of trauma gets trapped in the body, kind of like through muscle memory. Even when the brain blocks things out, the muscle remembers, the body remembers, the subconscious remembers, and those things can get locked away. And unfortunately, when those things and experiences get locked away, all of the energy gets locked inside of your body as well, which can, one of the theories is that's what contributes to the increased physical health problems after people experience trauma. Um, Trauma can contribute to lots of physical health symptoms just going through that. Like it can lead to some chronic pain, some muscle stiffness and soreness, and even really big things like increased blood pressure, risks of heart attacks, and actually even cancer. So that energy keeps us stuck and causes us harm if it's not released. So when we incorporate creativity into the treatment process, our goal is to help to release that stuck energy from the body. That frees it not only from our body, but from our mind, and allows healing to take place. So that's how it works with trauma. Creative techniques can also just serve as general coping mechanisms and part of our self-care that keeps us mentally healthy as well. With trauma, we often build up people's coping mechanisms quite a bit because it can be hard to remember that we need to take care of ourselves, and that we have to cope with all these hard things that happened. And people can turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms if we don't get some healthy ones in place. So, doing things, like singing, dancing, painting, writing, all of those are definitely healthy coping responses that can help us deal with, the bigger harm done when we experience trauma. And then, creativity, along with that, definitely helps and serves as an adjunct to mental health therapy in general. So even when we are doing and using traditional cognitive behavior therapy techniques, we can still incorporate some creativity in what we're doing to really help people make some progress, and find some coping skills. And just some examples that we may use that you can incorporate into your daily routine as well is creating a playlist of uplifting songs. So if you're feeling sad, angry, worried, stressed, you can automatically just go to this playlist that's going to make you feel better. It can be tempting to listen to music that's aligned with your mood, but if you listen to music instead that taps more into like this positive, uplifting sort of feelings, it's going to shift that energy and make you feel better. We may ask you to draw pictures of your emotions. Now, what represents to you anger? Like, how does anger look? How would you represent that on a piece of paper? How does your sadness look? What does your grief look like? So drawing that out can be really powerful, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Then we can also frequently, the last strategy that's creative that we commonly incorporate into therapy is journaling about your thoughts and feelings. Journaling is just so well researched. Personally, I've been doing that since my parents gave me a clown diary that had a lock when I was 7 years old. For the most part, I've never really stopped writing. There have been times where maybe, I don't journal for a month or two. Life gets busy. But for the most part, I kind of have an entire narration of my entire life to a certain extent. So it's quite interesting what you can see and find when you go back through your journal, too. It's definitely interesting to see where you were when you were younger. So going back to drawing pictures that represent your emotions. So again, if you read my article that I posted this week, would have been posted on Saturday, I included a research study that was completed about the squiggle test. It was actually an online thing that was the research was done during the COVID-19 pandemic because people were more isolated. They couldn't necessarily get to the therapy office. There was this increase in need for therapy. People were dealing with so many different stressful events in their life and just really needed some support. So the squiggle test was created, and then they did some research on it to see if it was an effective tool to help people. Thankfully, it was. Not surprisingly, it made a difference for people. But what they did is they gave people like a prompt of what to draw, and it's just this program that you could kind of draw into it, I think on the screen or on a pad. Just kind of answering that prompt, they draw a picture about it. And then psychologists developed some reflective writing prompts that also went along with the drawing. So you drew like this picture, the squiggle, and then, in a journal on a piece of paper, you would answer the questions, spend some time reflecting on those things. And so what the researchers found was it increased people's self-acceptance, their self-compassion, their sense of control in situations that were maybe out of their control, and their overall competence, like feeling competent that they could navigate difficult circumstances. So I love that we're getting some research that confirms what a lot of us therapists already know, is creativity is a powerful tool that really helps us to grow and helps us to express ourselves in a way that benefits us mind, body, and spirit. So on that note, I have a creative activity for all of you to do this week. This is so it's in Liana Lowenstein's book. It's a free book. Anybody can find this. It's called Favorite Therapeutic Activities for Children, Adolescents, and Families. Practitioners share their most effective interventions. I've used this intervention quite a bit and really like it. That's why I am sharing it with you. And it's not one of Liana's personal interventions. It's one she compiled for this book. And the source of this is Trudy Post-Sprunk. And just to make sure I'm giving credit to the right people. So the first piece that you do is, get a piece of paper, I didn't bring it into the room with me, but from my time as a play therapist, I still have a um, art book, not like a blank kind of sketchbook, but I don't have it upstairs with me. If you have a sketchbook of your own, or if you have some sort of paper or poster board, even, I mean, you could always use a piece of notebook paper, printer paper, whatever. Just grab a piece of paper and then grab something to draw with. It may be colored pencils, crayons, markers, watercolors, chalks. Obviously, the options are endless. So just choose your favorite medium that you want to draw with and draw silently a boat, a storm, and a lighthouse all on the same piece of paper. I will have to do this week as well. I didn't do it beforehand. I thought about doing it beforehand, but didn't end up having enough time before I was jumping on here to talk about it with you. If you do this, or when you do this, not if, please share your pictures in the comments. I would love to see what you draw. And I will share mine as soon as it's done as well. Mine may not be done until next weekend, but I'll definitely do what I can to get that posted and share it with you. So again, you draw a boat, a storm, and a lighthouse all on one piece of paper. So not separate pieces of paper, all one piece of paper. And do it in silence, this one. So after you have your picture drawn, this will be the fun part, especially for you friends on Substack, is write a story about what you think happened before, during, and after the storm. No parameters there other than it's before, during, and after the storm. Those three pieces are included. But you can just let your creativity flow to be able to do that. And again, I would love to see your stories that you create too. So please feel free to share those with me and with our community. So that leads me to, other than doing that activity this week, I want you to create an intention for how you're going to add creativity to your life. Maybe you want to spend more time journaling or writing. A lot of you here on Substack, that may be your goal. How can you incorporate writing into your daily routine, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes every day? Perhaps it's starting to paint more or taking photographs, getting reconnected to music. Whatever it looks like for you, just create some sort of intention of what you're going to do. And now for our weekly reflection. This one's somewhat long, so feel free. You don't have to write it down as I'm talking. I'll make sure that it's posted in the writing that's talked about that summarizes the podcast. So there's several questions in our weekly reflection. What were your favorite toys that sparked your imagination and brought you joy during childhood? What creative activities, such as drawing, building, or dancing, captured your attention most frequently? As an adult, what significance does creativity hold in your life, and how does it shape your daily experiences? How much time do you dedicate to expressing your artistic side, whether through art, writing, music, or other activities? In what ways can you incorporate more time in your schedule to nurture and engage in creative expression? All right, friends. Like I said, that was a long one, but that leads us to the end of this week's segment. If you have any questions about the activities that I shared or anything else about creativity, its role in trauma healing, overall mental health therapy, please feel free to post those in the comments. And also, if I do get questions, I will be able to answer those, adding a Q&A segment to the podcast. So if you have questions about mental health, relationships, or parenting, anything at all, feel free to email those to me at hopepiecetogether@gmail.com, just like the title of my Substack is Hope Piece Together. And so that's all one word, and then at gmail.com. All right, and next week we will be talking about our authentic self and what that means. So I hope you can tune in then, and I look forward to sharing more about that with you next week. Have a great one. Thanks for being here. Bye.